All right, welcome to Filibusted. My name is Troy. Ryan Howard is with me today. We're going to be talking about how Trump is fighting a one world order. Yes, you heard that right. And the implications there. And many people know that he recently gave a speech, I believe, on Tuesday at the UN. And it was shocking. It was probably mind blowing for some people. I think it made some people very irate. What does this speech and what Trump has said at the UN have to do with the crypto market? What's it going to do? We're going to talk about that later. But we're going to jump into why we believe this is a much bigger issue than just a speech, than just one address. And it actually has to do with essentially us versus the New World Order, or us versus the one world government, whatever you want to frame it. Ryan, any thoughts before we jump into this?
Well, yeah, I think we're going to find that Trump is really standing by himself in this. And I think he did not pull any punches. In fact, he threw more punches in the speech than I expected. And even with the individuals he was talking to in the room. And so there's especially one world leader that he said he ran into him 30 seconds before he ran up on stage. He's like, well, I guess they're going to listen to this. So it's fascinating. I think we got a lot of stuff to get into here. It's kind of wild to see some of this stuff.
Well, this video here that I have pulled up from Fox Business called it a tough, pragmatic address about how they can actually save themselves. So Trump is essentially delivering a appeal to all of these nations, that were represented here, and saying, hey, this is how you can actually fix the problems that you're having. And we're going to mention a few nations specifically that are having much more severe problems than others. But at least Fox Business had to say about it. They said, I think it was refreshing. And they said the other delegates looked terrified. I'm going to pull up an image real fast here so you can see kind of that they do not look happy. They do not look happy. I will say, and that's Germany right there. But I don't know if that's just like it's been a long day, or if that's I am really mad, or if I am terrified.
That's the thing in public things like this. You got to just watch your face. You could just be a normal pose, and that's what you get. So
100%. And we're going to get into the reason why would they be terrified. I think it's more than just, well, Trump is saying something we don't like. I think Trump is actually talking to people that they've ignored for a long time, and we're going to get into that. But one of the things that Fox Business said in this interview here about it, they said, we're never going to see another person like him as president of the United States. Talking about Trump. I don't think they're right. I think they're wrong about that. I think we are going to see another person like him, maybe not to the same level or whatever, but because Trump is waking a lot of people up to a lot of things that have been silenced for a long period of time, and now addressing the UN, he's not just waking up the American public, but he's talking to the populace in a lot of other nations, and they are starting to wake up to some things. And I'm not defending everything Trump does and says. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying he's moving a big piece on this chessboard against a one world order that needs to be moved. And how do they fight back? Well, let's look at the funny mishaps that happened. Some people have been saying that this was purposeful. So let's talk about
funny mishaps or, intended sabotage and embarrassment, but whatever, potato.
Yeah. Let's talk about these funny moments first before we jump into what's actually happening behind the scenes. So this is the White House. It's always an honor to speak at the United Nations, even if their equipment is somewhat faulty. Make America great again, President Donald J. Trump. So pretty great how he was able to laugh that off. This is a couple responses on X. Here's one. The joke about a broken teleprompter wasn't comedy. It was power theater. Trump used UN malfunction to signal UN irrelevance. Flipped chaos into dominance. This is a pretty good perspective. Here's another one.
Pretty good take.
Trump didn't just give a speech at the UN. He walked in with a broken teleprompter, a stuck escalator, and still delivered a knockout message that shook the globalists. What are your thoughts, Ryan, on the malfunction?
I think that's very well done. I mean, whether it was intentional or not. I mean, if it's intentional, that's a whole nother issue. And we've seen other leaders just freeze and have nothing to say. Obama's won, Biden's won. I mean, they basically are teleprompter presidents. And so Trump, it's just he's
Harris in there that happened to her one time.
What's that? Who?
Harris is not a president, but presidential
Oh yeah,
candidate.
yeah. Other leaders, yeah.
Yeah.
But Trump is just a natural at this. And what's
Mhm.
one of the things that he said was, "Well, it's broken, so now you get more from the heart." And it was kind of like, he just turned it into a positive. Like he turned it into like basically like the guy said that tweet you said was perfect. And so he was able to use these, and he even made a point about he actually turned it into he transitioned it into the bigger failures of the UN. And we can get into some of those quotes. And so he not only just stayed on top of it, got a laugh out of it, he actually turned it into to say, well, what the problem, this is indicative of the bigger problems at the UN. And so just a complete flip. But that's just sort of him using his, what he can do. But he's actually speaking from what he actually thinks. It's not just a platform that is, that you have to try and stay aligned with. It's like, this is actually what he thinks and what he's been saying for decades. And so, yeah, I think that, I'm kind of 50-50 on whether it was intentional or not. I could certainly see that, but Trump's ability to roll with the punches is kind of bar none. So I think he definitely used that to his benefit.
No, 100%. And I think what we see with Trump is when the teleprompter goes away, we see that he doesn't resort to the hive mind of what his cabinet has told him to say or what his people have told him to say. He's actually got an opinion of his own, right? And I think that's helping to cause people, ordinary citizens of the United States or other nations, to wake up and say, wait, what do I think about this? Do I have an opinion of my own? And the population is starting to speak back against, this order that we see. It's weird that we see this thing that's threaded throughout, all these different sovereign nations that, that they're different in their sovereignty. And yet for some reason, they seem to be pushing the same agenda, even though in some cases, the data shows the agenda is not helpful, right? Or that the stance is not working, or that the solution's not solving a real problem, And so it's like, where is that coming from, right? And
go ahead, finish your point. I was going to say he actually, he spoke very clearly about, like, he used words that you wouldn't expect, like that who is doing these things, these agendas, and it's not helping. And it's not only is it not working, they've changed what they said. Like he talked about climate change. What used to be global warming, and then it was cooling, and now it's changed. And he just went back like decades and almost a century, I think, and just kind of just went through that systematically. And then, he even mentioned that he said many years ago, is a quote, "I bid on the renovation and rebuilding of this very United Nations complex. I said at that time I would do it for $500 million." And he actually gave a guarantee for that. And he said, but they decided to go in another direction. And so this was back when he was in his development days in New York. And he said it ended up being much more expensive. They spent between $2 and $4 billion on the building. And he said they didn't even get the marble floors that I promised them. So it was so bad that he said that project was so corrupt that actually U.S. Congress asked him to go testify before them about how it was a tremendous waste of money. And that they had no idea that.
So they brought him in as the expert opinion, to testify. That's crazy.
Exactly. And so then he pivoted and said, this is another quote. So he said the cost, it could have been even much more than $5 billion. And he said he would have guaranteed at $500 million. And this is not an empty guarantee. He did this for many other high profile things, which we might talk about later, where he actually came in under budget and had a schedule. That was kind of his thing. Like, that's what he did. And he guaranteed that. But he pivoted that and said, unfortunately, many things in the United Nations are happening just like that, but on an even bigger scale, much, much bigger. Very sad to see. And so he used this as an analogy for the systemic dysfunction and corruption in the UN, and, wasted billions on a building, wasted corruption in the operations at the UN, reason they fail at resolving wars, doing migration, global crises. They just fail at everything. And so that's what, and then he said, I almost forgot. And he said, and the escalator didn't work and the helicopter worked. So it sounds like the construction still isn't finished. So they still got work to do on this building complex.
No, it's a perfect analogy. It's a perfect analogy. So we're going to look at 4 main points from Trump's speech, and then we're going to talk about the one world order that he is fighting against. And this speech of his is just it's just a conglomeration, or it's a summary of the things that he's fighting against. And then after that, we're going to talk about how Trump's speech potentially in the long run could affect the crypto market as well. So we got some interesting stuff, but before we do that, we're going to hear a quick word from our sponsor. Investing can be confusing and scary, but it doesn't have to be. Genesis Gold Group takes the guessing out of the game and guides you on your gold investment journey. We at Filibusted love the genius design of the Prepper Bar, which breaks up into sections, kind of like a chocolate bar. But if you prefer high security insured gold storage, they have that too. And unlike Fort Knox, the gold is actually there, 100% owned by you. So don't wait to get started. Visit filibustedgold.com today for a free investment guide from Genesis Gold Group. Every time that ad runs, our sponsor pops or our producer pops up on the page and starts dancing. And so I'm very tempted to put him up on the live stream. But I'm not gonna do that today. So we're gonna talk about Trump's 4 main points, and then we're gonna get into, and you're gonna see this pattern of this globalist agenda woven throughout this that's connected to what one day will be a new world order. One day will be a one world government, and you're seeing it already playing out. And it's almost like there's this weird, eerie, spiritual thread that's connecting everything together. It's very strange. But here's Trump's first point is about migration. One of the, and you know, these are going to be a little out of order, but I just put them in the order of what I felt was importance for this video. But the first one is migration, obviously talking about illegal migration, you know, and he said, look at the United States 1 year ago versus today. He said, look at the difference in the number of illegals crossing the border, right? And the effect that was having on the economy, and the effect it was having on so many different aspects. He said, look at the U.S. as an example. And he said, what's happening to your nation? And, you know, and he addressed those present, and he emphasized nations protecting their borders from illegal migration. He reaffirmed the idea of nationalist independence and discarded the notion of globalism. And, you know, one of the things that I like to do is I like to get very subtle about things. So I have very subtle opinions when it comes to all of those different things, right? And I think there's room for that. But I think when it comes down to the base level of what needs to change, it's very obvious that illegal immigration is very bad. And it's very obvious that open borders are very bad. And it's very obvious that what's happening in Europe and a lot of the countries that were being represented here is a downward spiral that if they don't correct it in time, if they don't, and some of them, maybe it's already too late, I don't know. But if they don't correct it, they're done for, you know, and I think that's what Trump is trying to say. You know, so what are your thoughts on that point, Ryan?
Yeah, I think he went, I mean, he just railed on him, and he just went right after it. But he even said, he gave a quote about how the UN has actually impacted illegal immigration in the US. And he was very direct. He said in 2024, the UN budgeted $372 million in cash assistance to support an estimated 624,000 migrants journeying into the United States. Think of that. The UN supporting people that are illegally coming into the United States, and then we have to get them out. The UN, he says the UN is supposed to stop invasions, not create them, and not finance them. And he says the UN provided food, shelter, transportation, and debit cards to illegal aliens on the way to infiltrate our southern borders. So, yeah, he put these people on notice. I mean, but can you believe that? Like how, like I had to double check, like what? Like that's, right. And are you kidding me?
What is the reason why? Like this is, I'm going to point to the thread now. We're going to, you know, take a piece of thread and a needle, and we're gonna weave it through this entire thing. The thread is, if you have a one world order, one world government, what does that look like? Well, it looks like open borders everywhere because there are no more borders. You've got one state across the globe, you know, and so anything that pushes in that direction is supporting that one world agenda, you know, like, and that is why all these nations are, you know, having a problem with this. And listen, they're bowing the knee to fear, obviously, because they don't want, well, we don't want to say anything about this people group. We don't want to say anything about this. It's not about the different people groups necessarily. It's really about the fact that open borders destroy a society, destroy a culture, and destroy an economy, and destroy a nation. You know, it's not tangible in the world that we live in. It just doesn't work. So any other thoughts? And we're going to move to the next point.
Well, yeah, and I would say, just even if you look at specifically how it can work out very practically, if you overload, like even in the U.S., not only do you overload the welfare system, you overload all these things, but they're also trying now to get to where they're not only counting U.S. citizens and legal residents or U.S. citizens, people who can vote in the census. They're trying to count illegal immigrants here in the census. And what does that mean? That means that they will get more representatives into the Congress. And so, and if that happens, well, who are they going to be voting for? It's going to be more left leaning. That is traditionally what happens.
I mean, that's back in the day when people used to buy with gold and silver, every single shop would have a scale, where they could weigh, well, how much does this weigh? Right. And if they wanted to give you back less change, they would have a scale that was off balance. So it looked like you're getting the right amount, and it was unfair weights that they were using, and that's what's happening now. If you have illegals, it's like you are off balancing your economy because if you're not, if you're illegal, you're not paying taxes, but then you're giving representation, then it's like it's on scales. And it's the same concept, you're cheating. You're not just cheating the government. It's not like, oh, I cheated on my taxes, I cheated the government. No, you're cheating the American people. You're cheating every single other person that lives here. And people that have come to this country illegally, and that have the documentation. It's like you're treating them unfairly, and I think that's what some people don't realize.
Yeah, and I said that typically, they would elect more left-leaning representatives, and that is what we see, because that is why they are pushing for those policies, because they want that to be the case. And what happens when we have more left-leaning leaders in our government? Well, they go more toward that globalist agenda. And so we saw that with the Biden administration. I interviewed Representative Steve King, or he was former representative, U.S. rep from the state of Iowa, and he talked about how the Biden administration systematically gave over sovereignty unofficially to the WHO. And if they didn't take action, U.S. sovereignty, like health and all this sort of stuff, if the Congress didn't take action, it would have quietly went into effect. And that basically would have been the case. And they also kind of gave little resolutions to all these other countries that really the U.S. wanted. And so it was to give up the sovereignty. And so that's been destroyed, thankfully. But that's the direction. That's the agenda.
That leads us right. That's the thread going right into the next point. Because the WHO, it runs on fear, right? Like, give us your sovereignty, give us the authority, and there's a fear-based motivation there. It's the same for the second point Trump made, which was the energy production climate change issue. And so he talked about how the idea of green energy is a major hoax and that it has actually made nations bankrupt without a reasonable cause. So I think you've got some quotes about this, Ryan, but before you jump into that, again, I would say there's subtlety to it, right? There's subtlety to it. And I'm all for protecting the earth. I'm all for being a good steward of the earth. All of those things, 100%, right? Doing the things in the best way we can for the environment and everything. But at the same time, we're talking about the base issue that's so large and so distorted that it's not even worth getting settled until we fix that, right? And that's what Trump is addressing here. Is he's saying, hey, this is a hoax when it comes to what we're saying we're doing and how that's going to actually fix things. And instead, it's flipping the economy's upside down. You're going to see in a little bit how this actually is affecting the wealth of these nations and how this affects the crypto market as well. But yeah, let's pull up some quotes from Trump on this issue.
Yeah, so just some direct quotes from this exact speech is he said, It is the greatest con job ever perpetuated on the world, in my opinion. Climate change, no matter what happens, you're involved in that. And so he basically goes, like I said earlier, that he went from global warming to global cooling to now climate change. And so they just kind of continually change, continually move the goalpost, and that's exactly what he's saying. And then he says, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll say this. I think the climate changes, but I think there's a lot of I mean, what you're saying, Ryan, is 100% true. They keep moving goalposts. They say, well, it's not this, then it's this. It's not this, but they're using it to control, right? And I think there's a lot of there's data that shows the climate changes, but it goes in cycles. It's like, It changes, but then it comes and then it changes again, and then it changes again, and it's like it keeps correcting itself.
And it's a perfect villain because you can never solve it, and you can always find another variable, and you can always freak people out about it. And I mean, so they go after, he says the carbon footprint is a hoax made up by people with evil intentions, and they're heading down a path of total destruction. So he basically gave an example of people going and giving a speech about all this stuff, carbon footprint, and then they go and get on their private jet, and then they go fly to the next place, and they're like, they don't care about this, and that's exactly the point. It's not that we shouldn't care about the environment, we do. It's that they're overstating things and feigning that they care about it when they really don't, and it's just about control. And so there's all these mechanisms being set up,
and the solutions that they present, that this one world order or one world hive mind, however you want to, the solution they present is the hoax. That's the real hoax. It's like, we're going to fix it. It's like, you're going to line your pockets. You're going to do this, you're going to do that. And then you're going to get your foot in the door where you want it. And it's just crazy.
Yeah. And here's the third one. He says, all of these predictions made by the United Nations and many others were wrong. They were made by stupid people that have cost their countries fortunes. So like I said, he didn't pull any punches. And it's true. Like, there was a few years ago, I think it was in his first term, when he sat across a delegation in Germany, or with Germany, and was basically like, stop pretending like you're going to stand up to Russia. You're not going to stand up to Russia when you get 30% of your energy from Russia. You're not standing up to them at all. And until you untangle that, it's going to mean nothing when you sit here and say these things. And the dude sat there, and then he kind of waffled a little, but like, that's what I'm saying, is Trump is really speaking from the truth and the reality in these things. It's not some waxed perfect speech that's just like, oh, let's just play nice. And like, no, he actually wants to resolve these things, actually wants to move the needle. And we see this because he's been saying the same things for decades. Like, I mean, we went back and even covered this on many other episodes. And so that's just a few quotes, but it really shows
an episode about the truth, climate change. And and we've done a few episodes about it. Now, what's crazy though, too, is, we just keep passing the buck. It's like, well, you can buy green energy credits, and you can, if you pay enough money, all of a sudden you've reduced your carbon footprint, even though you never did a thing. And guess what? The people you're paying the money to in the long run is probably China, or a country that is selling the green energy credits to you. And they're not doing any of this stuff, like they're worse than everybody else when it comes to the environment. And it's like, oh, we just magically fixed the problem by buying green energy. We paid enough money to fix the problem. It's like, you can't do that. You can't go out in nature and lay $100 bill on the grass and suddenly you've fixed the environment. It's like, it just doesn't work that way. Like, you have to actually take practical steps. And at the same time, it's like, we have a responsibility as human beings to recognize that, yes, nature is important. Yes, we can't live without the trees. Yes, we can't live without a working environment, all those kind of things. But at the same time, the first responsibility is the people in our neighborhood. We have to recognize that human beings have more innate value than trees do. So we prioritize where, let's take care of the people first, then that, and that is a long-term game, right? That's a long-term plan. But at the same time, if you're spending your money buying fake green energy, credits, and you're not taking care of your people, and you're letting them, and you're destroying your nation while you're doing it, it's like you're playing a political game. It's not real. So
Let's say that's all it is. I mean, that's exactly right. And the thing is that, this energy credits, that's for companies now, but the system's already there for that to be for individuals, like, and tracking your footprint and do your part and this and that. And at some point in the future, most likely there's going to be a limit to how much your footprint can be per month. And so then now you can't drive that car anymore. By the way, since Congress passed a bill that it's got
surrender your iPhone, get your green phone,
right. I mean, in China, they have this literally. They have to use an app on their phone to get into their own apartment building. And if it scans red, they don't get in. And that's why there was a big explosion after COVID of homeless population in China. And the app will say, oh, went to this zone where there was a COVID thing, so it can't come in and affect other people. But we all know that it really could be something else. Like, they were just in this area where there's a suspected underground church or something there, or internet searches or all kinds of things.
They use it. There. They use the fear to get this control. Once they got the control, then it's not about what the motivation anymore is different. Now it's we can do whatever we want with it. We see that with China. We see it around the world. Let's move on to the next point, because I really want to get through these, unless you've got something else.
Well, I was just going to say that these world leaders don't point out things about China. They don't point out about, I've been to Beijing probably half a dozen times and just all over Eastern China. And when I got there, I asked if after 3 days, I literally was like, is it always this foggy? And they kind of looked at me and said, that's not fog. That is pollution. That's smog. And
Wow.
I laughed because I thought they were joking, but it was like literally, it was looked like a foggy all the time. And when they had the Olympics there, they shut down all the businesses in Beijing for 2 weeks so that it would be clean air. And they do that before these big conventions and all kinds of things, kind of like Newsom did over in California. They actually cleaned up the streets in like a few days before all their buddies came over and he wanted to show off San Francisco. And so, but that's the reality of what's happening is they're building these coal fire plants, which coal could be fine if it's done in a clean way, but they're not doing it in the clean energy way. They're doing it in the dirty, old fashioned way. That's, just decades old technology. And they're doing it every single week, almost every day, I think, new plants. And so the point is that these people, these elites are not consistent at all. It's just pushing an agenda to get what they want. And so that's the final thing I would say about that.
Crazy. Yeah. San Francisco is probably one of the worst smells I've ever smelt in my life. If I can get really creative with the word smell there and use it 7 times in the same sentence. Let's move on to the next point. So we've got this needle in this thread, right? That it's a one world agenda, one world order, a hive mind, and it's moving through all of these points that Trump made. The first one is the migration issue, the illegal immigration. Second point is energy production, climate change, and how he called that a hoax. And the third one is the wars, the what has the UN done to actually promote peace between nations and to stop the fighting, right? Well, he asked, what's the point of the UN if they're not helping to land these peace deals? What's the point of them even existing? Imagine having the guts to stand up in front of the UN of all places and say that. Why are y'all even here if you're not even helping? I want to pull up this article because I think this is critical.
I mean, he literally said in his speech, he's done 7 of these peace deals and didn't get a single call from anybody in the UN to help get him across the finish line.
Nobody helped. Yeah, it's crazy.
And then he's like, okay, what are you guys doing here? Why do you even exist?
Why do you even exist? Exactly. All right.
We are seeing why they exist, but it's not what they say is the reason.
There's an article from Caliber. So if I can say the name of the country right, Azerbaijan, is that how you say that?
Azerbaijan.
I've never heard of this nation before. I'm just going to be honest. Never heard of this country. But the president of this nation is addressing the UN today. Okay. He's addressing the UN actually right now. It's live right here at the top. He's addressing them live. But what many people don't know is he addressed the UN 5 years ago exactly. And he appealed to the UN and the international community to restrain Armenia and to prevent another war. 6 days later, a new war ignited, launched by Armenia, and the Armenian army opened fire on this peaceful nation and peaceful civilians in the front line zone, and thus began another war. And the UN did absolutely nothing to resolve this conflict. They did absolutely nothing to ensure de-escalation, and they just watched it happen. And this article is essentially debating and making the argument that the UN has in many ways turned into a debating club itself. Like that's all they're doing is it's just leaders getting together to debate things and then do absolutely nothing and go home, and in some ways, they even get into talking about how Trump himself has been one of the leaders that's actually trying to do something that the UN is supposed to be doing. So obviously we've seen, the UN makes a very bold statements and stances on Israel and that conflict recently, Ryan. So do you want to jump into that and let us know kind of what's going on?
Yeah, for Israel. So Trump, he talked a little bit about it, and he said that some of this, his quote from there was, some of this body is referring to the UN. Some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists and for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities, including October 7th. And so he went into that, and there was a smaller little assembly. It was a general assembly on, I believe, it was a UN General Assembly and UN Human Rights Council. And so there was a U.S. representative there, and you can see this here. Look at this disgusting headline. This is from the United Nations. Says, UN Commission finds war crimes and crimes against humanity in Israeli attacks on Gaza health facilities and treatment of detainees and hostages. So, okay, if that's the case, how many of these resolutions do you think and articles have they put out about Hamas being terrorists and what they are doing and what they did on October 7th? Well, none. And so that's exactly ridiculous. And so the UN, I mean, he even said, like, one of the US representatives was there in this council and said that key UN agencies have unfunded bodies that have been accused by, or that have accused Israel and its supporters of double standards or misleading the portrayal of these Israeli actions versus the militant or terrorist actions. So we're not saying everything Israel does is perfect. That's not at all the case we're making, but they are only criticizing Israel. Why are they not talking anything about the terrorists that are leading in Gaza? And so he actually criticized the UN for hosting this briefing on Gaza on Rosh Hashanah, which excluded Israel, basically. And so and he said that shows that the council they value performance over peace. And so he said they have over 80 plus council meetings since October 7th that only emboldened Hamas and disrupted negotiations that have been being led by Trump, Rubio, Egypt, and Qatar. And so they just continue to get in the way, continue to take one-sided. This guy also condemned the recent terrorist attacks in Jerusalem. And he also said that Hamas, look at this. So people all want to defend Hamas and talk about how the atrocities are all on the Israeli side. But he said Hamas actually struck the same border crossing that delivers half of the aid that goes to Gaza. And so the aid, they're coming to Gaza, the Hamas attacked that border where that aid comes through. And so kind of ridiculous. And they actually plunder that aid, and it's just crazy. I mean, they're doing all this stuff on their own people. They do not care. They're not leaders. They're not recognized as leaders. I mean, it's just absolutely disgusting. And so anyway, he called, Trump and him are saying, and this guy in this council was saying that we need to be calling on the release of these hostages and a peace deal. That's what, or a ceasefire. And whether that's the case or not, it's been clear that if Hamas were to stop fighting, then everything would be done because Israel would be done as far as we see it. But if Israel stopped fighting, Hamas would continue, and they would continue until Palestine was free from, from the river to the sea. That's what they want to do, is wipe Israel off the planet. And so,
and I agree that Israel has not been perfect in the way that they've handled things and their actions, and I am the first to stand up and say we should be able to criticize Israel's actions, especially, and even as a supporter of Israel, I'm going to criticize those I support. Why? Because I want them to do a better job, right? At what they're doing. But at the same time, the hive mind agenda that we're seeing in the world today, and I'm just going to speak from a Christian perspective. You look at Revelation, you look at the Bible and things like that. If for those that are watching that are Christian, this is going to make sense. The hive mind perspective in the end is there is going to be a one world government. That this is what Christians typically believe. There's going to be a one world government that comes against Israel, or at least a one world organization, of nations that comes against Israel. And so when people like Candace Owens and the other people that have taken these very strong stances in support of Hamas and against Israel, it's like when they criticize Israel for things, but they don't criticize the other side, like Hamas, for things that are way more vile and atrocious. And if you just look at the video footage from October 7th, it's like, how on earth could you ever support what they're doing and how they're doing? And it is not self-defense. It is not fighting a war. It's unrestricted evil, in almost every form. It's insane. It's gross and disgusting and insane and unrestricted. It's just like they just came in to be evil, and it's crazy what they were willing to do. And if you support one side and you don't support the other, or you criticize one side, you don't criticize the other, that is evidence that you've fallen into the trap of the hive mind, and that you're not willing to look at it rationally, and it's like, at that point, I'm like, something has to be done, something has to be done. And as a Christian, at least, why would I be willing to listen to somebody who's, not willing to look at it rationally, not willing to examine it from all angles and all sides? And man, I agree, Ryan. I agree with what you're saying. There's that you read that quote from Rubio: "As long as Hamas exists, there will be no peace in the Middle East." It's like it really, that's the problem with a quote unquote two-state solution. Yeah. That's the very problem with it. It's like, okay, you can have a two-state solution if you have two states that are willing to operate within in a reasonable way, but you don't have that. You have Hamas, which is a death cult that all they want, and they've explained this, they've publicly stated this, all we want is to kill Israel and destroy all of them, and Israel's like, all we want is peace and to be able to defend ourselves and to, and it's like, You
Yeah.
can't have both at the same time. You can't have your cake and eat it too. It's like you either have one or the other, but you give a two-state solution, all that means is more fighting. That's all that is.
Yeah, and well, and
Mm.
I also watched a little interview from the UN or the Israeli ambassador to the UN, and he basically, I mean, he said, okay, yeah, two-state solution sounds great, but there's no credible Palestinian partner. Like, who are we going to make this
Exactly.
two-state solution with? Like, you guys,
Definitely not Hamas.
it's
If
nuts.
there was, maybe that would be a different story, right? But there's not, and it doesn't look like there's
Right.
gonna be, so
There's,
it's like
right.
I'm just in that. I'm not talking from a Christian perspective there. I'm just talking from a political perspective, like a rational political perspective. Maybe there would, there'd be an option there, but it's like there's even from that perspective, there's not.
Right. And there's other, like Iran and all these others, Lebanon and all these other areas that are all involved in this. So it's more complicated, but they're all focusing on this one area and only criticizing the one side. And, like you said, from a Christian perspective, a biblical perspective, Israel is very important. It's actually even tied to, their response to Jesus Christ is in the discussion of the return of Jesus Christ and the reign of Jesus. And so it's a big deal. And there's a lot of fracturing happening kind of in the West in this discussion. But, I've heard, like Charlie Kirk and all of them, and they're talking about like, well, yeah, I mean, we need to be able to talk about these things and debate them. And we've done other episodes on this, but it's like, we criticize our own government and we're still supportive of the US and we want what's best for the US and we're still pro US, but he's, they're kind of saying, well, if you criticize Israel at all, then now you're an anti-Semite and you hate Israel. And it's like, oh, that's absurd. But at the same time though, it's ridiculous to not be very clear about criticizing the other side. So if you're only criticizing Israel, that is ridiculous. And so that's a little bit of what we saw, some platforming of some things here, like with Tucker Carlson and like these other, I think we did an episode on that. And so with the nun, which was just ridiculous, the things he didn't really challenge.
And I'll say this, since we're talking about Tucker Carlson now, I'll say this. He has actually made some statements this week where I've got some hope for him. I'll say that, I think he's starting to realize maybe he's crossed the line. Maybe he's gone a little too far into that. Yeah. And I think he's starting to backtrack a little bit. And I'm just saying that's the way it looks. I'm hoping that that's true. But let's move on to the next point. So we've been weaving this thread through Trump's speech that is connected. The thread is Trump is fighting against a new world order. Trump is fighting against this one world agenda, right? And the thread is going through all of his points. And it leads us to the last point, which has to do with trade. And how do you control the people if there's a free market? Like, you can't, because you can't. Freedom and control don't exist together. So what does the one world order look like when it comes to trade? Is you're pushing towards socialism, you're pushing towards Marxism, you're pushing towards all of these ideas, that lead away from freedom when it comes to economic trade. And I mean, me and Ryan were talking about this earlier, and we kind of agreed. I hope that you agree with me on this, Ryan, but we'll see, that Trump is essentially a walking billboard for the benefits of capitalism and competition in business. Because you look at what he said about the UN building itself, it's like, hey, I bid on this. I guaranteed a $500 million deal, guaranteed it. And they ended up spending billions of dollars and got a worse building than they could have had, and so is Trump trying to, is there a little bit of like envy mixed in there, or trying to like prove something? Maybe, yeah, maybe. But his point is still valid. He was a businessman guaranteeing a $500 million deal. And obviously he builds good stuff, and that's what his company did.
Yeah.
So it's like, and they brought him in as the expert to weigh in on, to testify about it, and so all of that to say he's a walking billboard of the benefits of capitalism. When you have a free society where you have the best rises to the top, the cream rises to the top, we're going to work the hardest. We're going to be integrous in the way we do business. We're going to be reliable. We are going to make sure we're doing this right for our customers. And we want long-standing commitments to our customers and to our market. Guess what? You're going to have a really, really, really good competition. You're going to have really good results. But when it's socialism and when it's Marxism, what you're going to have is you're going to have, here's what the government said you have to do. And it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. You're just going to have to pay for it either way. And that's what you get. Right. And it's like, well, if that's and I'm going to get paid whether I do a good job or not, so then it's like, you're going to wind up with something that's real sloppy, falling apart. The best example of this that I can think of is if you go watch the Chernobyl. Well, I wouldn't necessarily watch it if you're, if you don't like really intense things. There's a lot of language and stuff. But there's the HBO series Chernobyl. But there's a book. You can go read the book if you want. But it's this idea of you've got this communist society that's produced a nuclear reactor, right? Producing nuclear energy. And because of the way the system was set up, nobody wanted to hold themselves accountable. Nobody wanted to hold their department accountable. Nobody was communicating. It was all about making the government look good. It was all about making the USSR look good. It was all about making hiding things, right? And it eventually led to one of the biggest disasters we've ever seen, in the history of the world, in one sense, in the way that it unfolded, and it's like, it's a defining moment, I believe, for a free society versus a state-run society, and a state-controlled market. And man, it's just crazy the difference there. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
Yes, I mean, I think that he's absolutely. I think a walking billboard. That's a new term. I think that's a great point about capitalism. And you might think, oh yeah, he can say that about the UN building and all that, but actually he has done some very high profile projects like the Grand Hyatt in New York, where he did all and the the Woolman skating rink. These things were way over budget, way over, and he brought him in, got him actually finished, and it's like an iconic thing now. And so he actually has the ability to do that. And then there's others. I mean, we could go into what he did. He was a brand builder. He built the Trump Towers and the golf and hospitality brands. He was in publishing the Art of the Deal bestseller. Entertainment, The Apprentice on NBC from 2014 to 2015. That was a ratings hit. And so, all of these things, he obviously knows how to work the business. If you look at since he's been in office, let's see, I think he has 17 trillion in new investment flowing into the US within 8 months. And Let's see, what did Biden have in 4 years? 1 trillion. So 17 trillion in 8 months versus 4 years and 1 trillion of investments flowing into the US. And so also largest tax cuts and regulation cuts in U.S. history. You can see we can talk about the stock market hit record highs 48 times in a short span. Wages rising. We talked a little bit about that, whether it's really rising or whatever, but the overall pace, highest in 60 years in some ways that you can characterize that. And so there's other issues and other inflation and other things that need to be addressed. But absolutely, I mean, he's definitely the business mind and the business guy, and that's what we needed in government, because in our government too often we have short-term solutions which give up long-term gains and long-term options, or medium-term, and they only affect one group of people or a few groups of people instead of taking the whole thing into account and actually fixing a root cause of something, because there's not this long-term approach to things. And that's the way China does things. They've got like 100-year plan. And so, that's quite different. And they've got a different way of doing business, which is not capitalism. It's called state capitalism, where they've got businesses and that sort of thing, but they're all under the thumb of the state, and the state really can control a lot of the production and shut things down and do all that sort of stuff. But yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And again, to wrap up the idea of this one world agenda, this thread that's woven throughout everything that he addressed, again, going back to the Christian perspective, like you look at Revelation, there's this idea of you can't buy or sell unless you have this mark, right? And what is that pointing to? Well, it's pointing to control on trade. It's like you can't trade unless you're part of the system, right? And it's a greater government overreach, and the handcuffs on what we're allowed to do economically, versus a free market, which is what he's fighting for, and what he's telling these countries, like, hey, y'all better, y'all better figure this out, and why, people responded to this. So we pulled this up earlier, but people were frustrated, right? And obviously they've got the headphones in so that they can understand what he's saying, all that kind of stuff, the translation there. So it's interesting that you see this connection of all these nations hearing the same thing at the same time, right? And here's the thing, though, is that some of these people are frustrated. I think some of these people are just waiting for this speech to be over with, right? But what's happening, I believe, is that one of the reasons they're so frustrated is because the countries that are leading these ideological strategies of the, that Trump is speaking against, they're falling apart right now. Some of the countries like France, look at constant riots. We've seen over the last several years in France, just people that are so upset about the government and the things that it's been doing, the restrictions there. Germany, we've seen the crazy just disappearances and random deaths when it comes to people on the right politically. It's like, tell me something fishy is happening without telling me something fishy is happening.
Right.
It's like, wait, what? We're just going to let this continue happening? Like, it's just, it's absolute insanity.
Yeah.
That should never be allowed in, what they would call like a leading nation of the world. Right. But Trump is saying out loud on the world stage at the UN what many of the citizens in these countries are already thinking. That's the thing. That's what's happening right here.
Yeah.
And I believe he's cutting through the hive mind. And many of the people are saying, hey, we were already thinking this. Finally, somebody's saying it. And this here, I'm just going to pull up a little bit of symbolism here, because I believe that what's happening here, you've got this huge representation. This is, if I can find it. Well, this is what Trump's doing at UN. President Trump champions sovereignty, rejects globalism. That's another word I believe for a one world order, like a hive mind mentality. Here we go. UN original UN charter, a symbol of global solidarity and cooperation, arrives at the UN headquarters in New York. When was this? This was June 25th of 2025. Okay. Got this image here from 1945. Pretty neat, but it's come to represent, this image has come to represent something pretty evil in some people's minds. Okay. And for good reason, I would say. The UN Charter, a symbol of global solidarity and cooperation, has, it's come to represent the idea of globalism, not just cooperation between nations, but nations becoming one. Right here, this is a quote from the President of the UN General Assembly. To understand the Charter's relevance today, it is to remember its significance in 1945. For a world mired in endless cycles of conflict and human suffering, the Charter and the principles that represented dialogue, diplomacy, cooperation, and solidarity was a path to a better, more peaceful, and prosperous future. He just described all of the things that the UN is not doing. He described all the things that are not happening in these nations that are so focused on solidarity, and globalism. It's like, wait, that sounds a lot like what Trump is fighting for, and not what the UN is for. The UN is for control. The UN, it's like the WHO is for control, and it's like dialogue, diplomacy. It's like where did those things go? Like instead it's no, don't say it if it's politically incorrect on the world stage anymore. It's like, are we all going to be controlled by fear? Are we all just going to hand over control to an organization like this, or are we going to push back and say, hey, we don't want to go down that path? So what are your thoughts, Ryan? And then we're going to get into what this is going to end up doing to the crypto market.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean,
all that to
ahead.
say, this is leaving at the end of September. There's the symbolism right there. I forgot. The charter is in New York right now, and it's been there since June. And guess what? It's going to be leaving. It's going to be going back at the end of September, the end of this month, at the same time that Trump shows up and makes this address. And so for me, I'm taking this as a little bit of symbolism, a little bit. It's an analogy. I'll say that. I'm hoping that the same way that this is leaving, that, man, I'm hoping the UN itself starts to crumble. I'm hoping that nations start to wake up, the people start to wake up, and that we realize it's not doing what it says it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I would say maybe they're sending it back so they can read it again and actually have a look at it and review it and keep that in mind. But yeah, I think perhaps the just getting rid of it is the answer. But we need to be engaged and we need to be informed. And like I said, with WHO and what the Biden administration, the Biden regime really was trying to do, and yeah, we can't have that. We got to have sovereignty, and that's the opposite of what they want. And so Trump's actually moving forward these principles in the right way, where you can't have solidarity in ridiculous, immoral, unethical, non-peace leading things. That's not solidarity. Like that's not what it should be doing and what is intended. And so Trump is actually moving these things forward more so than they are. And all they've done, they've completely shifted from the original purpose. And so, or perhaps that original purpose was never really the intention anyway. It was just this nice piece of paper. And so then they got what they wanted with these other things. But, Trump's really standing in the way of that. And other U.S. representatives in the UN and the WHO and all these other organizations, even leaving the WHO. And so, and our funding with it. And so, yeah. So,
Trump,
I think this
and Trump is really pulling the funding on the UN right now as well, as far as the US goes. So, I mean, this may be the beginning. This may be a stair step, maybe the beginning of the end for the UN. I don't know. That's just a thought. But let's jump into the crypto market real fast before we finish. President Trump's UN speech could shape Bitcoin and crypto outlook. Here's how. Well, we saw the market generally drop. I think the last couple of days, it's kind of hit a stall and then dropped again. And after doing pretty well over the last month, I would say. But this is actually, so that could have possibly been due to his speech, could have had something to do with it, since he's kind of known as the crypto president now. He's pushed a lot of agendas forward when it comes to crypto implementation in the government and really supporting those initiatives. But it may have nothing to do with that. Maybe other reasons. I haven't fully looked into that. But this article from Coinpedia points out how the overall outlook, based on what he said, seems pretty good. And so let me show you this chart real fast. Industrial electricity prices in leading economies. This is the United Kingdom over here on the left, and this is India way on the right. The United States is right here, second to right. And this is talking about the nations that have adopted these clean energy, like going back to the energy production. And this is what it says: on the point of energy production, an increased supply of cheap electricity through traditional sources will reduce Bitcoin's mining costs. Furthermore, they're talking about Bitcoin specifically. Furthermore, according to a recent report by Nuttall, I'm not sure how to pronounce that name, but the report shows that electricity production in nations focused on green energy is much higher than those using traditional non-renewable sources. So again, I'll say there's some subtlety here. I'm all for protecting the environment. I'm all for being good stewards of the world we live in. But at the same time, there's a bigger issue that's happening that Trump's addressing, and let's get into the subtleties once we address the bigger issue. And for the moment, it really looks like if you're actually going the route that Trump is suggesting, that in the long run, the countries that go that route are going to do much better in the crypto market than others. And based on some of the things that he's pushing, we could, it says right here, why is this bullish for Bitcoin and crypto? That's the reason there. And so it looks like it could be really good if some of these things are adopted. So there's that. I wanted to throw that in the end because I know some people are really into the crypto stuff. And so Doug's not here to give us his, he would probably have a lot more to say about that. Doug was traveling today, and Reese was working on a project, and so they both had to miss. But they also, this article also talks about how Trump's stance on immigration and migration could also create an indirect boost for Bitcoin and crypto in general as well. Not going to jump into that, but throw that out there as well. Anyways, any closing remarks, Ryan? Let's look at those faces one more time. They look so happy. It's like Christmas morning.
Yeah. I that's pretty interesting take on the crypto scene. I'm going to have to dive into that a little bit more. I just hadn't really thought of that. I mean, it's an interesting connection. We see here that there's a clear agenda going forward. We see that many countries falling in line with it. And Trump, we see not going in line with it. He's standing against it very clearly and very punch to the gut kind of manner. In fact, I listened to his whole speech. I think it's about all 50 minutes long, almost an hour. And it's worth listening to the whole thing because, he doesn't pull any punches, like I said. And he even addressed the president of Brazil, who he was the person I mentioned that he had run into right before that. And he spoke clearly about what was going on with Brazil. And obviously with my close ties to Brazil, I'm following everything that's going on there. And I've got people that are letting me know what the impression is there. And so the people of Brazil definitely want to be close to the U.S., but the leaders of Brazil are trying to go the other direction, closer to China. But Trump is really standing in the way of this, and he's making it clear for all to see. And like you said, he's putting it on display and speaking the language of all the people in those countries that also do not want this globalization and actually want to maintain the life that they have and want to continue going the right direction. So it's great that we got to dig into all this. I appreciate you putting all this together and running through it, and everybody joining us.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being in the comments today. Sorry, we usually typically do a little bit better with pulling comments up when we have more people, more hosts on at a time. But we didn't get to do that today. But yeah, y'all, thank y'all for being here, especially our regulars. Y'all are awesome, coming and supporting us and hanging out in the chat. Hopefully we'll get do better at hanging out in the chat a little bit more next time. But yeah, y'all join us again tomorrow. I think either me or Ryan or both of us will be on tomorrow, and we'll have something else to talk about. If y'all did not catch the episode about the weather, the weird weather pattern, the Hurricane Gabrielle and some of the symbolism there, potential biblical connections, even very, very interesting episode from earlier this week. If y'all have not, it's worth listening to. It's just, if nothing else, I think it's going to be entertaining. So there's that. That's all we got for y'all today. Let us know what you think in the comments afterwards, and we will see you next time. Gold is not just a backup plan if the world falls apart. It's an investment opportunity that could set you up for generations. There's never really a bad time to invest in gold, but you want to make sure you have the right guide. And that is where Genesis Gold Group shines. Whether you are a first-time buyer or a seasoned investor, their trusted expertise and competitive pricing makes them an easy choice. They offer tangible assets in case of emergencies, but they can also design the perfect IRA just for you. And they'll even cut through all that confusing red tape from the IRS. We at Filibusted love the genius design of the Prepper Bar, which breaks up into sections like a chocolate bar. But if you prefer a more high-security insured gold storage, they have that too. And unlike Fort Knox, the gold is actually there and 100% owned by you. Genesis Gold Group is a safe, simple, and convenient way to invest. Visit filibustedgold.com today for your free investment guide from Genesis Gold Group.